Thank you all very much for coming. It's really great to see you here. This is really your home and our home. I feel like the Forge is one of those places where discussions must happen to revitalize what we need in the world. The Israelis and the United States are in a project to destroy Iran. The United States is in a project to take over the Cuban Revolution. We just can't permit them to do these things. And then they're coming for Africa. They've already been here before. They've had this continent before. This is a place for ideas to fight against imperialism. That's what we're here for, and that's what we're going to do this evening. This event is also an event of Inkani Books, which has published the volume Tricontinental. We also have Comrade Soli's foreword to the Gowan Mbeki book. You can see it back there, republication of The Peasants' Revolt, a remarkable book of South African Marxist scholarship. We also have Isa Shivji's 50th anniversary volume, Class Struggles in Tanzania. And then, of course, Mandla Hedebe is sitting right there, our best-selling author, his very, very important study of South Africa 30 years after the end of formal apartheid. Lots of good books. Please go and have a look and get them. Before we get going with our conversation, I know this is going on and on and on, but I come from the Asian civilization where we can't start a conversation about a book until we break a coconut or we do something spiritual and important. So for that, I would like to invite Ambassador Fakri to come and join us. I would like to invite our dear legend Ronnie to come here for a minute, and Comrade Soli to come here for a minute to help us launch this book. So if the three of you please join us. What we'd like to do is we'd like to give you a copy of the book. We'd like the two of them to stand up, please. Yes. We'd like to give you a copy of the book, and then we'd like to have a photograph with the book, and then we start talking. How's that? Okay. Perfect. Let's all stand together. Let's stand together. Yeah, okay. Come on. Come on. Okay. Thanks a lot, comrades. To be among legends. I'm going to start with a pretty simple question to Manolo, who edited this book. This book is interesting because it collects for the first time the documents of the Tricontinental Conference, a conference held in Havana, Cuba in 1966, just less than 7 years after the glorious Cuban Revolution of 1959. Less than 7 years afterwards, they bring this magnificent conference now 60 years ago. Now 60 years ago. The world is in such disorder. In this period, it's been important to collect these texts, to study them, so that we learn what we need to do today. So can you give us some context of the conference and why it's important for us to look at the texts and documents from the context in our period, for why our comrades should study this today?
Well, firstly, thank you to the Forge for inviting us for this book launch. This feels like this is now the first real proper launching of the book, because it shouldn't have been launched in the global north. It needed to be launched in the global south. Also, it means so much to launch this book with the presence of our dear GS, Sauli Mapaila of the South African Communist Party, whose work contributed to this book. And of course, an actual veteran commander of the Tricontinental battles, our comrade Ronnie, who's here, is with us as well. To talk about context of the book, I think, is to talk about the moment in history when the Vietnamese are fiercely fighting back against US imperialism. The struggles against Portuguese colonialism are raging on in Guinea-Bissau, in Mozambique, in Angola. It's a period in time in which the ANC and the SACP are leading the liberation struggle against apartheid. But it's also a time in which the Palestinian struggle, the PLO, has just barely been founded only a year previously. And there are armed struggles that are breaking out throughout Latin America. So it's a period of intense upheaval of movements across the world who have essentially taken on the task of unraveling the remains of colonialism and neocolonialism that were still dominating the world. And without a doubt, part of the key context is ultimately that it couldn't have happened anywhere else but in Cuba in 1966. Because Cuba became, not in 1966, but in 1959, with the victory of the Cuban Revolution, became the central point for all revolutionary movements around the world who were becoming united, and the becoming part is the key word here, were becoming united in a process of struggle to the death, not just against colonialism and neocolonialism, but in the struggle against imperialism, understanding the need to build a socialist future. So that is the essential context. What actually ends up happening in Havana? I strongly recommend you all read the book. But to summarize it briefly, Medio Embarca, the great Moroccan revolutionary, who was the organizer of the conference, but who was killed, disappeared by the Moroccan intelligence, by the Mossad and the US intelligence before the conference started, cleverly said that this conference was supposed to be the coming together of the two most important currents of revolution on our planet. The current, firstly, of socialist revolution that was inaugurated by the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, and with whom without we could not even think about anti-colonial struggles. And the second current, which was precisely that of the national liberation struggles developing throughout the global south. This conference personified, manifested this coming together. Manifested it in the fact that over 500 delegates from communist parties, from national liberation struggles, and the socialist states came together not to have theoretical debates, because there really was no theoretical debate about armed struggle or not, about electoral struggle or not. The only point of discussion was how would these diverse political forces from across the third world could come together and coordinate what they called at that moment the final offensive against colonialism and neocolonialism on the planet. They left that meeting with a strong commitment from Comandante Fidel, to whom we dedicate this book, by the way, in this 100th year of his birth anniversary. Fidel closed that meeting with probably the most staring words, which is that Cuban fighters would be willing to shed their blood alongside revolutionaries from any part of the planet. In 1966, that might not have meant much, in the sense that it was not a material fact known to the rest of the world. But only a few years later, that gets manifested concretely and clearly here on the African continent. I had the honor of being with Ambassador Fakri, with Comrade Soli and others this morning at the Freedom Park, at the Wall of Names, which has so many distinguished names, but then you see a whole section, an expansive wall that almost knows no ends, carrying the names of Cuban combatants who fell for the freedom of this continent. That is the literal manifestation of the Tricontinental Conference, which would go on not just to send Cuban fighters across the planet, but would ultimately create the political, ideological, and organizational basis for liberation movements all over. I probably said too much, but this is a night for ranting, right?
No, it's not a rant. It's important, I think, to set in place that if you have an enemy, let's call it that, if you have an enemy that's vicious and brutal, what we in our text 2 years ago, the text is called hyper-imperialism, we said that that enemy is decadent and decaying. Yeah, strong words. The enemy is decadent and decaying. We didn't mean the enemy was weak. You don't have to be weak to be decaying. You can be strong and decaying things. I mean, from your standpoint, given that you were one of the people who put together the hyper-imperialism text, maybe it's a good idea for us to clarify what that is. Because given the tricontinental heritage, that particular legacy, what are we fighting now?
Well, thank you, VIJAY, and thank you to the Forge, and thank you as well for inviting us back to South Africa. For me, I think it's one of the places I can call, one of my homes, where I learned a lot from the struggles here. So it's an honor to be here, and to answer VIJAY's big question in a few minutes, I think maybe I'll just say a few words first about the Tricontinental. Of course, all of us are part of the Tricontinental Institute, which bears the name in homage of the Tricontinental Conference of 1966. Of course, through the process of the International People's Assembly, we've been tasked to become an institute as a voice of intellectual production accompanying social movements around the world to help study our reality, to help study the shifts in our conjuncture, and how to push those shifts along. Of course, it's not enough to study it, we have to change our reality. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do is understand this current context of imperialism, which VIJAY has already pointed to, called hyper-imperialism. 2 years ago, we released a text called Hyper-Imperialism, A Dangerous Decadent New Stage. And we basically wanted to update our understanding of what we are seeing. I think around the world, we are already seeing a shift, something that points to in this title of the issue, which is the churning of a global order. Not something really of the liberation struggle 60 years ago, but something was happening that we've dubbed the new mood of the global south. We were seeing new configurations emerge, of course, led by rising forces like China, but of course, other forces like the BRICS through the global south. We were seeing new alignments across Latin America, Africa, and Asia, but we were not quite sure how to yet name it. At the same time, as VIJAY said, imperialism doesn't go quietly into the night. So even though we have seen in the last decades, especially in the last 2 decades, a shift of the economic center primarily to Asia, with China as the economic engine, but not only, we have seen this around the Asian continent, but in the global south. So give an example, today the global economy, the global south countries already surpass the global north countries when we look at the GDP in PPP terms. When we look at economic growth, the global south already surpasses the global north. When we look at production of industry, the global south surpasses the global north. So this economic shift to Asia has already happened. This is a transformation, a historic transformation that is not going to be easily reversed, even with a sort of MAGA project or kind of calls for reshoring, reindustrialization of the global north. At the same time, imperialism has its many controls. It's not just in the economic center. We learn a lot from Samir Amin and his 5 controls, from finance to communications to a variety of natural resources. And amongst another, most importantly, is the question of the military. And what we've been seeing is, in this hyper-imperialist phase, is to compensate for its relative loss in economic terms, and perhaps in political morale terms, the US, as the only imperialist force in this country, in this world, has increasingly relied on its military might. It's unfortunate to say what we were predicting 2 years ago about this turn to increase military aggression has only come true, even more so in the last year since Trump 2.0 came back into power. In less than a year, he's already bombed 7 countries. And of course, just this new year, we have seen from Venezuela to Iran, and we are seeing this escalating every day. So this trend towards hyper-imperialism through military supremacy is a trend we are seeing very clearly. At the same time, I think we have to try to understand what are the processes emerging in the global south. I think amongst the left, there's a lot of confusion about the path that China has taken, especially since the economic reforms of the 1980s and 1990s. And so one of the things we've been trying to do at the Tricontinental is to partner with the intellectual and left voices of China and create publications like this, available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, to help create a dialogue which is so necessary in this hyper-imperialist phase. We need to get to know each other, we need to talk to each other, we need to exchange our ideas about the state of the world. And so that's partly why we're also kind of attaching on to the Tricontinental release, also our humble magazine that we're publishing today. Maybe I'll just close off to this initial phase, I think we'll have more discussion, is that 1966 happened 60 years ago, of course. 1966 was also the last time, okay, let me try to start this. We had two starts of this year. We had January 3rd that started our year. Of course, I think it shook us to the core. But we also had another start of the year, which for us is the Chinese New Year, which was on February 17th. And this is the year of the fire horse. And the last time the fire horse happened was in 1966, the Tricontinental Conference, the Cultural Revolution. Many things of upheaval and of revolutionary content across the global south. So maybe I'll just end with saying, may the fire horse, may the year of the fire horse light a spark that will set a fire that can see the end to empire. Thank you.
Wow. Well, I mean, Carlos, it's hard to be entirely optimistic about the world we live in. I mean, you're sitting next to a very lovely picture of a smiling Comandante Chavez saluting us, I suppose. But January 3rd of this year was really quite a, difficult day to process what happened that day. What makes that day so interesting is just a few hours before Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores were kidnapped from Caracas, President Maduro met with the highest envoy of the Chinese government. That is to say, President Xi Jinping's personal envoy on Latin America sat for several hours with Nicolas Maduro. With him was the #1 in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the #2 from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This was a really big delegation from China. China has a lot of investments in Venezuela. Few hours later, the United States, just disregarding this meeting, Xi Jinping's principal envoy is in Caracas when you have 150 military aircraft above. I mean, how do we characterize the world when that's the set of facts we have to deal with?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here in South Africa, and it's a real honor to be with all of you and, of course, with my dear comrades. I think the January 3rd gave us a look at a new world, or a new moment in the world. Maybe not a new world. We've seen this before. We've seen this imperialist aggression before. But I think it was a moment to take away the idealism with which we see our projects, our revolutionary projects, and remember that we still have to confront this great challenge that is imperialism with our feet grounded in reality, and with our feet grounded in what the world is actually bringing to us now. I mean, with the coming of Trump 2.0, what we're seeing is the revival, at least in Latin America, the revival of the Monroe Doctrine, in a way in which is even more vicious than it ever was before. Because at this time, there's no pretense, there's no attempts at masking the viciousness, the ambition of the empire. Right now, it is open, it's rude, it's frontal, and it tells you that they no longer care about international law. That was completely forgotten. Not that they didn't violate international law before; they've done this before, but they had the pretense. They tried to say, "Oh, we're doing this for freedom. We're doing this for liberty. We're doing this for human rights." That's gone. Now it's a direct confrontation. They even forgot about that term they usually use for in international relations, the rules-based order. You know, this thing they try to establish in where they could make their own rules as they go and make their order as they go. Now we come to the realization that the world we live in, this hyper-imperialism that we're facing, it's trying to redefine a world order based on force. You know, that Trump repeats often, you know, peace through strength. It's not peace, it's aggression. It's imposition through force, through violence. That's what we saw. I mean, you have, Venezuela, the shock that we felt. I was there that night. My home is 5 kilometers away from where the bomb started to fall. This is a sound that nobody knows. Because in 200 years of the history of Venezuela as a republic, we hadn't had a conflict with another nation after independence. And here come 150 aircraft and just bomb, not just to take President Maduro and Cilia Flores like they did, but also, you know, there was 463 homes that were attacked, civilian homes. We had the loss of our people fought back, tried to defend President Maduro. But we're trying to fight against a country that in 250 years of its history, it has been at war for 232. A country that every year now spends $1 trillion, $1 billion in military spending. A trillion is correct. Okay, I get the translation back.
1.2. Yeah, 1.5.
I'm just trying to tell you, the magnitude of this. And we had, courageous Venezuelan soldiers trying to defend the president. We had our brothers from Cuba, in their internationalist conviction there, that gave up, sacrificed their lives to defend the Bolivarian revolution. But this is an overwhelming, angry force. They hit civilians as well. There's dead civilians. So they violated by that international law as well. They attack the civilian population. So we're in a place now where all pretense of international law, of international order is gone. This is what we have to face. But we have, and this is why I think this book is important, because we have cues in our history of how to resist. Because in the same way, this wasn't the first time the empire has an aggression against the South. This is the first time the South tried to come together and find a way to move forward. In the speech that Comandante Fidel gives in that conference, he talks about the need for us to have a common and simultaneous struggle in Latin America. But that's for all of us now, throughout the world. This is the moment where we have to be in common and simultaneous struggle against empire. This is the moment we have to remember that this is precisely when we have to stick together. And they're trying to make us afraid, because the bombing that we just saw in Iran just a few nights ago, it's trying to tell the world, if you mess with the United States, if you mess with empire, this is what's going to happen to you. And they threaten us. And the way they're speaking is so gross. They're saying the statements now from what was supposed to be a diplomatic office. They're saying, we will kill you if you don't agree with what the United States wants. So we're facing this. We have to stick together. We have to remember that the only way we can transform this world, the only way we can really fight back, is keeping together. Let's not be afraid. We have to fight back. We're all going to have our different fighting conditions. It's going to be difficult because this is not easy. We have to be realistic. I'm not talking about idealism. I'm not talking about a struggle that is not well thought out. No, this is a moment where we actually have to think, but come together. Because we can't let them decide what the future of humanity is, because they don't care about humanity.
Bravo. Bravo. It's interesting because when Amilcar Cabral's speech was printed in Monthly Review, the title given was The Weapon of Theory. We have to think. Manolo, I want you really to reflect on two things that have been swirling around my head for this period. One is this belief of the benevolence of the West. There's a persistent belief that the West, okay, it has this ugly history, but you know, the Europeans still believe in human rights. So there's this idea of the benevolence of the West, that there is some congressional Democrats in the United States who are going to help stop Trump, or for God's sake, the Canadians. Mark Carney goes to Davos, says there's a rupture. Then the moment the United States bombs Iran, his statement was identical to Marco Rubio, who's the mediocrity that you're thinking of, yeah? Such a mediocre person. He's definitely not Cuban. He was born in the United States, in Miami. There's nothing Cuban about Marco Rubio. He's such a mediocre character. Even when he's standing next to Trump and Hegseth, he looks like the person they bully when they're in the cabinet meetings. They make jokes about Marco, little Marco and so on. He just looks so pathetic, you know. But yet, he can call up and... So the one thing there, Manolo, is this idea of benevolence, that the West is benevolent, despite what the Israelis and Americans did in Gaza. I mean, they do this in Gaza for 2.5 years, yeah? And yet people feel somehow Mark Carney, you know, is going to help the day, or some Democrat, or that pathetic Keir Starmer, or Emmanuel Macron, or, you know, the West is benevolent. This is a problem they had to face in '66 as well, yeah? So help us a little bit with this idea that the West is benevolent, at the same time that it is viciously cruel in its behavior.
Well, I think the veil of benevolence is being lifted before our own eyes. It's being lifted by the sheer brutality that Trump, Netanyahu, and so many other figures represent, who are not somehow a shock to the system as some would like to present it, but actually a continuity in form and essence of what have been centuries of Western colonialism and of Western imperialism. I think one of the elements at the Tricontinental Conference in 1966, to us it kind of seems like common sense now, but it was not as common sense in that moment, was how interconnected the struggles of these different movements and organizations were. I think it took coming to Havana in 1966 for many leaders coming from Niger, coming from South Africa, coming from Palestine, coming from Yemen, coming from every corner of our oppressed and colonized planet, to actually identify that the enemy wasn't some abstract past that they could talk about or read about in books, but was an active military, political, financial, and commercial machine led by the United States. That lifted the veil in that moment. Actually being able to see and talk to each other about what they were going through. And to come out of that meeting with a strong conviction that it wouldn't be possible for the people of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde to fight on their own, or the people of South Africa to fight on their own, that it would actively take a massive struggle across the 3 continents, and in fact, including inside the United States and inside Europe. Now, in our own time, in this moment in which this brutal onslaught has been unleashed against the people of Venezuela, against the people of Cuba, most viciously against the people of Iran, who can believe this myth of international order, of rules-based order? It never existed. It was always a myth. It was a myth that they created to try to get the rest of us to buy into their program. But when we look at what actually happened only a few weeks ago at the Munich Security Conference, you had, of course, the reprehensible words of a Marco Rubio who said it out loud in a way that many others had refused for a long time. But you also had a Mark Carney and I would say an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who equally essentially call for the defense of the supremacy of the United States and its allies in the world order. One with rougher words, some with kinder words. But they ultimately call for the defense of Western civilization, of the so-called universal values which are the Western values. And I think it's kind of upon us at this point, in a world that has dramatically changed in the last 3 days, to not just break the veil of benevolence, but to actively go on the offense. At this point, it's not just whether we agree with Iran or not. There are some who may or may not. There are some who may or may not agree with Venezuela. There may be some who don't agree or agree with Cuba. But at this point, it is the ultimate battle for the survival of humanity against empire. We are facing truly the enemy of humanity at its greatest potency, determined to pick off one country after another until there is no one left who can question their dominance.
Bravo, yeah, okay. I'm going to come back, Tings, to the story that I offered Carlos about the Chinese envoy in Caracas. Because, I mean, one of the things that goes through our minds when we see the decadence of the attack on the Palestinians is, why can't we do anything to stop that? Why can't we save the Cuban Revolution? Why can't we do something to defend Venezuela or stop the bombing of the Iranians? And then the thought crosses our minds, where's the Chinese armada? Where's the Chinese gunships? Yeah? Where are the Chinese gunships? Where is the Chinese armada? It's a question everybody's thinking of. Yeah. Yeah, okay, let's put it down even harder. Where's the Russian armada, Tings?
Thank you, VIJAY, for that question. I'm not representing the Chinese state.
Everybody
or the
thinks so.
Communist Party of China. I mean, I think, of course, this is a question that many people ask. Can we not, with all the strength that we have seen and the rise of a global south, the rise of China as an economic power, why is it that China is not taking this next step to defend, including its close allies such as Venezuela and other countries? Of course, we can say this is rooted back to the historical tradition of China and the People's Republic of China, emerging out of 2 decades of brutal war, a century, what we call the century of humiliation. We have 24 million Chinese people who sacrificed their lives defending China against Japanese fascism. Just last year was the 80th anniversary of the victory of the World Anti-Fascist War. Often forgotten is not only the Soviet sacrifices of 27 million people, but also the 24 million Chinese people who died. We released a study about this last year, including others from the colonies across Africa, Asia. And so I think this experience informs how China has approached its foreign policy since day one, got solidified in 1954 before the Bandung Conference even, with India and China, 1955, peaceful coexistence, the 5 principles. These are things that still hold true. China has not engaged in a military war in almost 50 years. That being said, of course, he said, can we not do more? I think any kinds of rash or kinds of, well, one thing we can say, one of the things people also talk about is, well, China's become a strong military power. Look at its spending, look at its, we saw on September 3rd, the parades in China showing its military prowess. But of course, all of that has been oriented towards the defensive mechanism. defensive capabilities. We have seen over the last years, this is a bipartisan thing between the Democrats and the Republicans, of this escalation around the question of Taiwan. We have to understand that for China, securing the project of reunification is still a very important, unfinished national liberation process. And so the defense capabilities is where the military capabilities is. And I don't think we do want to see very quickly a rash sort of intervention of China in a military sense that will take us into immediate third world war between nuclear powers. That being said, doesn't mean that we don't want more actions to be taken on many different fronts. Can I just add a couple of comments based on what Carlos and Manolo had said? I think one of the really important things you said, if you mess with us from the US perspective, then we will bomb you. I think it's actually not even that. I think right now, any country that is trying to assert a sovereign path, a sovereign development is being under attack. Whether you're of a socialist orientation, whether it's Cuba, Venezuela, or China, or you are a sovereign project such as Iran or Russia, or what we are seeing in the alliance of the Sahel states, they will be targets. So I think one of the things we're seeing, of course, we know that the ultimate target is China. And you keep telling me, you're next, China's next, and China knows that. And the fact is, I think that there is a kind of, let's say, existential threat that China represents by virtue of existing. By virtue of existing to show that there is another path that is not the Western capitalist colonial path to sovereign development. And that itself, whether or not you agree it's socialist, it's maintaining a socialist course, I defend that. That is enough to be an existential threat and to be a target with all the things we're seeing. And then a second thing I want to say is not only the myth of this international rules-based order, I think it's the myth also that there might be multiple imperialisms, that there might be this inter-imperialist rivalry, or that there's sub-imperialisms, many things that we hear, over the last years. It is very clear there is one imperialist force that has completely been unmasked before our faces. So I think in that sense, it encourages us and necessitates that we come together and fight this common enemy. So thank you.
Yeah. Carlos, here's a tough one for you. Why is North Korea the only country that hasn't been overthrown? I'm just kidding. Just joking, just joking, just joking. Just joking, just joking. Relax. Relax, everybody. Relax. We're all against nuclear weapons. Relax, relax. Relax, relax. We're not having that debate right now. Carlos, one of the other things that has annoyed me a lot in the last 3 years is the inertness of the Arab governments, for instance. Where is Jordan? Where is Egypt? I mean, the country of the Nasserite revolution of 1952. What's the military doing sitting in their bases? Billions of US dollars of equipment. They're not moving to defend their Palestinian brothers and sisters. Yeah, that has bothered me a lot. Here's Venezuela. Direct infringement, attack on its sovereignty, right across Latin America. All these governments of the right, whether it's Bukele in El Salvador, Milei in Argentina, the emergence of the angry tide in Latin America, the devastation of that term which we've used to name the office you coordinate, Nuestra America. Where is Nuestra America? The fumes of that solidarity, Jose Marti, the ideas of being together against the Yankee. Where is that? Can it be revitalized?
All right. Before I go there, I want to say something about the question you asked, TINGS. And I think, one of the problems also, I think, is the way is that we're falling into some sort of trap where, we're trying, sometimes we focus on, not on the aggressor, which is imperialism, which is the United States, but then on the other ones. Why weren't they there? Why wasn't Russia there? Why wasn't China there? And that's a trap, because they want us to fall into that trap. And the thing is, we shouldn't have to talk about the world in these terms. Because I'm going to tell you something from the bottom of my heart. I don't want a war in my country between different countries. I mean, I don't want a war in my country, period. If we have to fight a war because we have to defend ourselves, there's no choice. But I don't think the world needs, countries to come and play out, other struggles in their territories, because the bombs are going to fall in our homes. But I also don't see China or Russia, for that effect, trying to fight the U.S. It is this Cold War mentality. It's only on imperialism's head. And this is something I think we have to contribute to fight, especially when we talk about this. Because we can't let them drag us into that. We already overcame a Cold War, which was not cold, not here in Africa for sure, not in Latin America, not in Asia. So we don't want to be dragged into that again. And if there's a lesson from this conference that this book talks about, it's precisely that we have to find alternatives for ourselves. We also must not think that we need some other country, some other stronger country to come and save us. If we're depending on that, then we haven't learned the lesson. If we're depending on others to come and be the ones that rescue us, we're never going to develop, we're never going to seek what we're trying to seek. I think one of the reasons China is not confronting or is not stepping in is because China is concentrating in doing something outstanding, like raising 800 million people out of poverty. You know what that means? 800 million people that now don't live in poverty because the Chinese government is focused in doing things for China. That's what we need. We need to concentrate in how we develop, in how we move forward, and how we can stand together, because that doesn't mean we do it alone, is we stand together against this Cold War mentality, against this type of imperialism. You ask, where is Nuestra America? Nuestra America is undergoing a very difficult moment, because I think, again, in this idea that the U.S. has of restoring dominance, they felt in the last couple of years, they felt that they could have placed problems in China's vicinity or in Russia's vicinity in order to become that super hegemon that they had been. Now that's no longer possible. Now they realize that in order to maintain some type of superiority, they need the resources that we have in our region. So they're co-opting the elites. That angry tide is a group of elites that has been conservative throughout ages, not just now. This is not a new group. This is people that have already been here, and that they desire to restore also their dominance. These are elites that are not tied to the idea of a national project. These are the elites that were whose wealth and whose force growth was always tied to imperialism, and they have an upper hand now. They have an upper hand because we have suffered years of neoliberal destruction of our countries, of our economies. We have people that are struggling to make ends meet, and it's a difficult challenge for the region in many of the countries. But one of the lessons that I think we learned in Venezuela is that when you try to do a transformation process, you have to believe in that transformation, and it has to be deep. Because on the 3rd of January, the people that went out on the streets were people whose lives were really transformed, were people who learned to organize themselves and move forward and create a different future. All those other projects, progressives, semi-left, all those other projects that didn't trust the people enough to do that real transformation, some of them even disappeared. Some of them are now irrelevant in the region. When you do a real transformation, when you really transform lives of people, you stand strong despite whatever happens. That's why they can't do anything against Cuba. They can threaten. All the attacks, all the attempts at humiliating Cuba, and every day we see more and more resistance, more and more pride in the Cuban people. It's inspiring to see how, no matter how cruel the attacks against Cuba are, the Cuban people are there to show us that when you have conviction, when you do the real transformations, you will succeed no matter how much the empire tries to choke you and pull you out.
Beautiful, beautiful. Beautiful. You see, this is what Fidel called the battle of ideas. Really top-notch people. We're going to come to questions now, but before we do questions, as you're thinking of your questions, I'm going to invite Comrade Omar to come up here, play us a little music on, what is that, a cuatro? It's a cuatro, the instrument of Venezuela. So, Comrade Omar, it's your room. Yeah.
This song is by Ali Primera. Ali Primera is our most popular songwriter, our most popular, our most revolutionary musician from Venezuela. And this song is called Yankee Go Home. This song? Yankee Go Home. But I need your help. When I say Yankee go home, you say Yankee go home, you repeat. Okay. Yankee teme que te levantes, América la libre, sepa que no lo hace. El Yankee teme a la revolución, el Yankee teme al grito, Yankee go home, Yankee go home, Yankee go home, Yankee go home. Viene remontando la Amazona, el grito rebelde del Carioca y de unirse con su hermano, el obrero venezolano. América Latina, América Latina, América Latina, Yankee go home, Yankee go home. Levanta en tus manos la bandera de la revolución, América Latina obrera, y grita con fuerza, Yankee go home, Yankee go home, Yankee go home. Bravo. Yankee, go home. Yankee, go home. Gringo, go home. Gringo, go home. Latin American workers tell you, Yankee, go home. Yankee, go home. Levanta en tus manos la bandera de la revolución, América Latina obrera, y grita con fuerza, Yankee go home, Yankee go home, Yankee go home. Yankee go home.
Okay, who's going to do the mic? All right.
Can I go for it? Yeah, thank you very much, comrades, and I really appreciate the opportunity of seeing you firstly back here home, South Africa, but also the important interventions and the sharing of ideas. I must say I'm really inspired, but I want to pose this question, and it's a question that has been bugging me, because I think that there is really a lot to learn from the solidarity of the Bandung generation. And I think that Yvonne characterization of solidarity using our native language, I think was better, was the best. Because it reminded me of the concept in my language, isiZulu, sithi izandla ziyagezana. Simple means that I can't define it in English. But the point here is that that generation gave us the Cuban fighters who came to our region to die for our freedom. That's what solidarity is about. And it's what this generation gave to us. Now, in the context of that, I've been backed by this question. Because we have, for the past few years, observed the genocide in Gaza. We have observed the kidnapping of President Maduro. In a very short space of time, we are now seeing the devastation of the Iranian people. And I can assure you, they are going to come to Cuba, no matter how resilient that revolution is. Because neo-imperialism has defined what it needs to do to maintain its hegemony. Now the question that is bugging me is that they will come for all this revolution. And by the time they use Taiwan and Japan as cannon fodder, there might be no one to defend China. So the idea that the nobility or the noble idea of the Chinese revolution of lifting billions of people out of poverty, as much as we must appreciate it, but solidarity is about doing exactly what Yvonne was saying. It's not about being inward looking and looking at your own narrow interests. And I think the Chinese revolution must seriously learn that, because if they do not do that, if they do not learn from what the Cubans did for us, all the Cubans did was to take their dead back home, nothing else, because they understood the meaning of solidarity. And I think for me, it's a question that has been really, really bugging me. How can Chinese make so much investment in Venezuela and not be able to defend that investment militarily? It just boggles the mind. Because I can tell you, imperialism will never do that. They will never invest their hard money and not defend their investment. I mean, there's nothing to defend in the Middle East, but they understand what is it they are trying to achieve. So I think that we have to debate this thing in the context of this generation that gave us a practical definition of what solidarity is. Thanks.
Great, great, great. Do you want to go in now? Yeah, okay. No, let's take a couple more. Yeah? It's a very, very fine question. Where's Zoe with the mic? Oh, Tariro. Yeah.
Thank you for taking my question. So in South Africa, we are taught through our principle of Ubuntu to welcome our guests and not to embarrass them. But there is an elephant in the room, and we have to ask this question. And I want to extend it. Vijay, you said, where's China in this entire thing? But I want to also say, where is South Africa? South Africa continues to send coal to Israel, #1 exporter of coal. And China is in Palestine via the drones that are made in China that are killing Palestinians. And that's a fact. So we have to ask, where is international solidarity when the machinery of war is made in China?
Yeah, one more. Let's take 3 at a time and then we'll do a round. Yeah.
Thanks, Comrade, for your presentation. I have just one comment, and to honor another guy who is Mehdi Ben Marka. The comment, so when you were speaking about where is Jordan, where is Arab in this kind of conflict that is happening in all this region, I was also thinking about Africa, because the African, after the colonialism, they start to have build a kind of blocks. So it's the French colonialism block and British colonialism block. So that is why we saw the Francophone Council, which is gathering all the Francophone colonialized country that was in the past and still until now, by the way. So the problem that this Tricontinental was a kind of opportunity to gather all those liberation force and all those stuff. So that was a something, and also Mehdi Ben Barka, now is to honor Mehdi Ben Barka, is not something new for him. Because Mehdi Ben Barka, when he was in Morocco, he was the one who built the National Union for Popular Force, which was a party and was the first left party in Morocco and Marxist-Leninist party. So, and he was one of the launch that after his party, we start to send forward, which is Ila al-Amam in Arabic, and the 23 Mars, those two biggest Marxist-Leninists in the region. So the heritage of Mehdi Ben Barka is huge, not just for Tricontinental, but also for the region. And also Mehdi Ben Barka, when was the desert war between, and was one of the cause why he was killed. Because the desert war between Morocco and Algeria, he was the only one who was standing against the war, and he was calling Ben Bella every day saying solidarity, and he's with Algeria in that moment. So that is why he went to France, and in that time the system in Morocco decided that he will get the high sentence. So Mehdi Ben Barka is one of the leader that is those days is forgotten in our region. You will not see a lot about, and it's part of our battle of idea in not just in Morocco, in the region, but also everywhere. You cannot those days see between the population those icons. So it's not just Mehdi Ben Barka, it's Brahim Serfati also in Morocco. So there is many leaders that with the time was killed by the system to not reproduce this kind of process and this kind of solidarity between people. Thanks.
Nice, strong questions to start with, Manolo.
I love them.
Bam! There was a right, there was a left, and then a little history lesson.
I love addressing the elephants in the room. Because it's not just in the room, it's a real question of our time. But I actually want to return it in a way that the comrade revolutionaries of 1966 would have confronted this question, which is that in our time, there is a sense of idealism, in fact, towards the belief that Russia, China, or any other state somehow has the overall responsibility to save humanity. I think these states play important roles in the confrontation with imperialism, but the ultimate responsibility to transform humanity, to liberate us, to emancipate us from the chains of capitalism and imperialism are in the working class, comrades. It is the question of organization that has to be brought up to the forefront again. That was being discussed in 1966, was that the struggle for liberation had to be led by the movements, not by the states. The socialist states came to 1966 to the meeting in Havana. China was present, the Soviet Union was present, DPRK was present, many other socialist states were present, and of course they offered very meaningful lines of support. But the ultimate responsibility was on the organizations of the third world, of the organizations of the working class. And I think in our time today, because of, I would say, almost 40 years of neoliberal onslaught, of postmodern deviationism, some of the left has forgotten the centrality of organization. And it's on us. That is why we're building this process called the International People's Assembly, that is gathering hundreds of people's organizations, of trade unions, of political parties of the left, to basically engage in that fight. It's on us. And the question of independent organizations of the working class is going to be the fundamental element on whether we survive this brutal onslaught of US imperialism in this era, or we are defeated. That's why my question is not whether the South African government or any of the Brazilian government is doing anything. I'm always asking, what is the SACP doing? And when I see them in the front lines of struggle, along with many other comrade organizations in South Africa, I feel we have a chance to fight and win. when I see the struggle that the landless workers movement in Brazil is leading, not just for land reform, but for socialism, I know we have a chance to fight. And when I see what the comrades of the different collectives are doing in the Alliance of the Sahel states, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, organizing from the grassroots, I know we can win. The fact that I know, the reason we know that Cuba will not just survive this moment, this fuel blockade, but will actually win and overcome the Americans, is not just because we have faith in the Cuban people as an ideal. We know they are going to win because they have a Communist Party of Cuba, which is an organization rooted in the working class, rooted in the people themselves and capable of doing miracles when confronted with adverse situations. So I really encourage everyone here not just to be radical thinkers, not just to be great intellectuals, not just to be people who feel the weight of this moment, but to actively become organizers of the revolutionary changes that we want to see in this world. To not put aside the question of organization and leave it for another day, because that day might not come if we don't organize now.
Before I get to the rest of you, I want to just add one more thing. You know, years ago, I was reading Marx's theses on Feuerbach. And the one that's always struck me is the 11th thesis, you know, when apparently Marx said, philosophers have only interpreted the world, the point is, however, to change it. And I've always felt Marx got his formulation completely wrong. That's a wrong formulation. The philosophers have hitherto interpreted the world, you know, the point, however, is to change it. No, Lenin had the better formulation about 60 years later in what is to be done. The point is, you have to know the world, and you know the world by trying to change the world. Those who try to change the world know the world better than those who just look at the world from outside a window. And what Lenin adds to that when he says, without a revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement, is of course the concept organization, because he's saying that line in the context of a debate about organization. Without a revolutionary theory rooted in an organization, there can be no revolutionary practice. So when you put those two things together, you got to move. If you're not on the move, the world looks like a lonely place. And man, it looks lonely sometimes.
Not in this room.
Not in this room. Definitely not in this room. Yeah. Sorry. Interlude. Forgot my place as the mere facilitator. Yeah.
We welcome you, VIJAY, to be in part. Oh, thank you, comrades, for these questions. I mean, I think we're exactly here to debate these questions, so I hope there are more of these discussions coming up. I think one of the things I want to add to what Comrade Manolo said is that an assessment of our current conjuncture compared to, say, 1966, in terms of what are the forms of solidarity that are adequate to the moment. I mean, in 1966, we were seeing the wave of liberation struggles that were brought together in the Tricontinental Conference, where our peoples were just gaining independence, fighting for liberation, many places through the armed struggle. And those were the main forms of solidarity that we were seeing. I think if we look fast forward to 2026, 60 years later, this is not the reality we are seeing. We are not seeing a rise of revolutionary forces. There is not an ascent of the left actually anywhere that we see. We do see emergence of revolutions that have a patriotic character that we should support, like the Alliance of the Sahel states that we are seeing. But we are not in that phase of history, and I think that we have to recognize that. So we have to also think about what are the forms of solidarity. I think we can all agree that, yes, we want China to do more. I'm also on that boat. But is it the case that we want China to be able to militarily intervene in all its foreign investments? I mean, that would mean it would need to create bases, basically encircling the whole world. And that's not the China we want to see. I mean, the US right now has 902 foreign military bases, many of them surrounding China. China has one in Djibouti. We can have, criticism about that, but I don't think we want a China that projects its military powers in the same way that, Carlos, you were saying, to become a territory where other kinds of battles are waged. And so I think there is also other ways. How does solidarity come through? We can say it's limited, is not enough, but of course, through other means of offering infrastructure, investments in loans and projects, the Belt and Road Initiative, these have been actually tangible projects that help in some ways, modestly, let's say, around a development project that doesn't fall into the kind of used and abused IMF, World Bank loans, the story we already know, that has not brought any kinds of improvements to the lives of the people, nor developed our countries. And I think another note there, it's not really the defense of having Chinese manufactured drones in Palestine. Of course not, we want to end that. I think there's sometimes a question of why does China do this, why does China not do that? What is this one, there's no one China. There's not a China that is doing all this, you know. There is the People's Republic of China. There's a Communist Party of China. There are Chinese state-owned enterprises. There are Chinese private enterprises. And we sometimes, I think, and there are Chinese people at large. And I sometimes think there is a conflation of why China this or that without understanding the deep complexities of the many agents and actors. There are Chinese private companies that are going to manufacture and sell arms to whoever is willing to buy them. So I think sometimes we have to have that nuance in there and also look, okay, where has the Chinese state tried to intervene? I mean, I think on the diplomatic stage, we have seen a consistent, you know, defense of the Palestinian statehood. We see China trying to play in a role of becoming a political mediator. I think it's a new role that it's still uncomfortable being from, you know, the rapprochement between Saudi Iran a few years earlier to convening of the 14 different Palestinian factions to Beijing to come up with the Beijing Declaration. This is a new role that China is trying to play, but I think there's a difference between what is the Chinese state trying to do and also to disentangle the many Chinese interests that sometimes we see and many contradictions that we see across Latin America, Africa, and Asia that we should confront as well. And so maybe I'll stop there.
Carlos Ron in that fantastic shirt. Congratulations.
Thank you, VIJAY. I just want to hit on something that I think is important when we have this conversation, and it's this belief that we have that multipolarity is something that we want to achieve, or that we look towards, or that it will be the solution against imperialism. And I think we fell in that trap as well. And I don't think the solution is in multipolarity, because multipolarity can easily just become a fight between poles. And that's not necessarily what we want. We have a tradition in Latin America, the Bolivarian tradition. Simón Bolívar, 200 years ago, he talked about the equilibrium of the universe. And in that very fancy phrase, what he was trying to say is, we must all work towards balancing out interests, not having the different poles just so that they would fight each other out, but actually generating a community of nations where you recognize each other's interests and then you work towards balancing them out, the equilibrium that the universe must have. Now, how do we do that today? And I think it's going back to what Manolo was saying. Those states, we need those states, but we need those states in the hands of the working class. So if you want to talk about solidarity, the first responsibility of the working class is to take power. You have to take state power. The working class has to fight for state power so that we can have that balance of the universe, and so that we can have really that solidarity with the movements that are struggling for their freedom, their emancipation, their independence.
All right, that's clear and good. I mean, it's an interesting moment, because I also agree that we want the complete isolation of Israel. But, it's a struggle. We're all involved in that struggle. I don't think it's an automatic, thing we can achieve. Let's get some more questions.
Mine is to the Honorable Carlos. The question is, what does it mean for the people of Venezuela? The current Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Madam Maduro, what does it mean for Madam Maduro to donate, Machado, so to say, thanks for correction, Madam Machado donating his Nobel Prize to the imperialist? What does it mean to the people of Venezuela? And two, My question is about socialism. That, what do you think the people of Venezuela needs now and wants for the future? Thank you, sir.
I think I'm going to be a little less fiery with this question, and I hope it's not too domestic, given this is a tricontinental discussion. But I'm glad Comrade Ronnie and Solly is here. But this is the question. The core theme of that 1966 Tricontinental Conference in Havana was forging a united front amongst liberation movements. So today the South African left, as we know, is deeply fractured. We've got populists in parliament, we've got radical unions, we've got more orthodox parties. My question is, from your international vantage point, what are the material prerequisites for forging a genuine united left in the global south today? And how do we stop retreating into these ideological differences if we have any hope of fighting this Western hegemony?
All right, let's take another one. Yeah. Anybody? Okay. You want to go? Yeah. Yeah, right here. Okay, take mine.
Okay. How's it, Carlos, Pablo, and everyone? I think what's defining a lot of the inaction today is that there's a double whammy from the imperialist core, and then they've carved out the resilience on the bottom with artificial scarcity. So most people adopt the stance of harm reduction. People don't want to be involved in wars and things like that. But at the same time, people in this room are captivated by the fiery spirit of revolution. That's what my question pertains to. How do we normalize this and bring it into bear? Because even in this country, we have agents of Israel and political parties which are soft towards them and apologetic. And we have even a leader of the official opposition who says genocide is a complicated word. So, we look at that party as like morality, but they sent an attendee into Gaza and they come back and say that there's no genocide happening. So even in this spot where you're sitting in South Africa, in this, this churning of socialism and action, we have agents. And there's one more thing. You can maybe use this as part of your answer, but there's this global consciousness that's developing digitally. How do we enter that world with all of our fancy talk here and Marxist-Leninist and stuff like that? Because there has to be a way to reach people and get them into the streets with action like that. So thank you. Thank you for
Very
coming.
nice. So
Appreciate
what we're going to do is I'm going to give each of you some time to respond, and then I'll take a few minutes and we'll then have people come and get you to sign the book. All right. Carlos?
So I want to address the comrade's question. I've read, there's this book I read not so long ago. It was a brief history of oil in Venezuela. It was written by one of our first Marxists, Salvador de la Plaza. And this book was written somewhere around 1970. But he does a whole historical background of the issue of oil, how it became the primary way in which imperialism extracted the wealth of Venezuela, and he talked about this the collaboration of a group of people in letting this happen, in not allowing Venezuela's wealth going to develop Venezuela, but rather enriching themselves. And he, in particular, he talks about a lawyer for a law firm in Venezuela with 3 lawyers, and he's very he was very critical of them, and he was very passionate about this criticism. And he says he talking about the first concessions that they sold to Shell in Venezuela somewhere around 1914. Just so you get an idea, Venezuela has it was 24 states. Venezuela has 24 states. 12 states were given into concession. Just so you know how bizarre this is. And that first concession was done by this law firm. And then he says, these people, made so much money in betraying their country that even today, 1970s, even today, their families are still enjoying the wealth of the money they stole from the country. One of these lawyers was the brother of the great-grandfather of Maria Corina Machado, who wins the so-called Nobel Peace Prize. What I want to say with this is it's the same people that have been exploiting Venezuela for decades. And the Venezuelan people know this. And, you know, obviously there's no merit for any peace prize. Obviously this was the imperialism's trying to put somebody in power because they knew what they were planning. They wanted to destroy the government, decapitate the government, and then have someone to put in power. The problem is that they always underestimate the people. They always underestimate the working class. They always underestimated the fact that Venezuela was building a revolution and that Venezuela was organizing and that the Venezuelan people were not going to allow just this rich woman and, you know, with this tradition to just come in and sit, you know, in power and take that away from the people. When they come in, and this is the, you know, the perhaps it was counterintuitive. I mean, we imagined different scenarios, but we didn't imagine that there would be some scenario where the president was kidnapped and then we still remain in power. But the fact that I'm here with you today, I'm not in jail, I haven't been killed, and I'm not being persecuted, is the fact that we had a revolution to be there and prevent that right wing to come into power. That woman has, because of her calling for an invasion, she has all the resentment of the Venezuelan people, even in the opposition. Because no one in the opposition, or, you know, very, very, very few people in the opposition that are not directly tied to her would come out and say something and try to defend her. If you see anybody defending her, it's people that live outside of Venezuela, that have no contact with the country for several years, because there's no connection there. What do the people want? Well, we have been building all these years. We have been building a democracy that is not just representative, but that is also participatory, where we can participate in the decision-making process, but also that we are the protagonists of that decision-making process. That every Venezuelan, in a way, one way or another, in the 5,336 communal territories that we have, we can place our opinion, we can work in a project, we can make decisions. We have brought democracy to the direct grassroots level. And we need that because we want a better life. We have been blockaded for 10 years. I mean, if you compare the income of Venezuela in 2014 to what came into the country in 2020, we lost 90% of the income. So Venezuelans have been suffering, but standing firm. What Venezuelan people want is to have access to a life of dignity. What we want is to be able to have that, that income, that wealth from the country, come and really be used as it was used in the first years of the revolution to develop healthcare, to develop education, to develop housing. We solved so many problems in the first years of the revolutions before the U.S. sanctions came in. Now, the last 10 years, we have been resisting and trying to survive. I think what we still want is to regain our right to our resources, regain our right to our sovereignty, and regain our right to having a dignified living.
Well, thank you everyone for the really rich questions and discussions. I just wanted to end with some points, is that I think learning from these revolutionary experiences, be it from Cuba to China and Venezuela, is that we have to understand that the construction of socialism is a much longer and complex process. You know, when we think about the Chinese Revolution, I mean, that's 77 years ago. Some people in this room is probably that age. It's our parents' generation, it's our grandparents' generation. The Cuban Revolution, even younger, and even younger, the Bolivarian Revolution. And I sometimes think that there is as leftists, a lack of patience to understand how complex it is to build socialism, the zigs and zags of history, how to build it within a capitalist world of hyper-imperialist aggressions that have all the tools of hot and hybrid warfare at its disposal to undermine us at any second. And I think a second point is also that I think class struggle doesn't end the day that the revolution, succeeds. And we've seen it, and one of the reasons I think in a way we are publishing this magazine, which comes out twice a year, is an invitation for anyone who's interested, who wants to seriously study what is the transformations in China, the contradictions in China, and is to understand that that class struggle takes on new forms in different stages of the country's development and the political conjuncture. And so in a way, I maybe just want to end with an invitation to continue that understanding. We are living in really complex times, and we've seen a very interesting moment, especially in the last 10 or 12 years, particularly under the presidency of Xi Jinping, of recognizing, having a very internal and an open self-criticism of some of the contradictions that emerge from having to open up to the West for all kinds of reasons, in particular to continue the socialist course under the particular conditions that China was still living in. So I just want to extend this invitation to all the comrades here to continue this dialogue, continue learning, and continue to exchange. So thank you very much.
Manolo?
I feel so excited. I'm glad we've had a lively debate. I wish we could have more questions of this character, because I hope it truly means that the people of South Africa are deeply invested in transforming their own reality. When I think back to the Tricontinental Conference in 1966, sorry that I keep going back there.
That's why we're here.
Okay, okay. I always recommend people look at Cabral's speech, because it ends by inviting us to not shout slogans at imperialism, that it's not a question of simply making condemnations or simply saying we are in solidarity with one or another struggle, but that the best proof of our anti-imperialism, of our socialist ideas and values, ultimately is in our capacity to go back to where we live and work to build the process for change. And I speak to you not as an academic. I speak to you as an organizer in the United States, where despite the hecticness of this moment, despite the madness in which we are living under, anyone asks me how I'm feeling on any day in the last 3 months, 2 months, I will tell you I'm feeling great. Why? Because in the US, we're seeing tens of thousands of high school students walking out in protest of ICE. I feel great because we're seeing labor unions for the first time in 80 years daring to take a general strike in defense of immigrants and defense of the working class. I feel great because as we speak, there are hundreds of thousands of young people across the US mobilizing in defense of the Iranian people against imperialist war against the Iranian people. So I feel great because we're in a world that is moving. We're in a world that's in motion. And I always do this because I'm an organizer. I don't know how to do anything else but this, which is to encourage everyone to walk out of this room ready to fight, ready to build, ready to organize, regardless of where we may stand on the left spectrum. The question is to organize. If you're not moving towards organization, then you're standing still and aiding imperialism at this point.
Beautiful, beautiful. I want to take this opportunity to tell a little bit of a personal story, because it is the 100th birth anniversary of Fidel Castro, and it's the 25th anniversary of my first trip to South Africa. I was invited to the World Conference Against Racism by Mary Robinson, who had just left her post as President of Ireland, and she had said, come to the World Conference Against Racism to talk about caste. So I came as a, person not knowing what to expect, and went to Durban, forgot to book a room. That's another story. I thought it would be arranged, but I didn't realize the World Conference meant the World Conference, Every hotel room was taken. It was crazy. I got on the stage and I spoke about caste. And when I was sitting down, a very nice man came up to me and handed a note which said, when I opened it, please come to this hotel, this room, at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. I thought, well, this is mysterious. Should I go? Should I not go? What is this thing? But the man waved to me and smiled and disappeared. So I took the risk because I'm stupid like that. And I went to that hotel at 2 p.m. In fact, being the kind of person from India I am, I was there a few minutes early, stood outside the door nervously, wondering what's on the other side. There was somebody standing outside, but he didn't say anything to me. It's obviously security. I knocked on the door. It was opened. I was ushered in. I stood there. Still no evidence of what was going on. And a door opened and in comes Fidel Castro. And I almost died. Like, I didn't know what to do because Fidel just walked in. He came, he held me, took me and made me sit on the chair. And he said, first, tell me about this caste thing. We don't understand it in Cuba. Well, I started speaking, this is the caste system, sir. Sir, in India, there's the caste system, sir, and so on. I was super nervous. I didn't know what to say. And after about 3 or 4 minutes, he basically cut me off. And he began to tell me, this is 2001, that we are in a really difficult period. And that this difficult period is going to be with us for a very long time. And he said, this difficult period is our battle of ideas against imperialist logic. And he said, people like you who teach in universities need to form a phalanx for the working class and the peasantry. We need to enter the battle of ideas where we bring the best of knowledge and information to our class organizations, to build our class organizations to have a shield of theory, so that our class organizations are not only fighting a defensive battle. I realized then the question about caste was a Trojan horse, because Comrade Castro had actually been bringing people in to tell them, people that they had identified, we need you to help create the theory for our movements, because our movements are entering a period of ceaseless defensiveness. That period continues. When we say, what does this or that element of the left do in the world, I think it's important to recognize, as liberalism has vacated its place, as social democracy has collapsed, the left has become the shield of people's survival, fighting to prevent people from being annihilated. And to fight to build positive proposals are very difficult. We are in a period of defensiveness. We need to create the strategy and theory of socialism. We are fighting to defend the very existence of humanity. We have to go to the next level. One of the reasons I'm so proud, Manolo, that this book is out, that this book is in a sense the starting point for us of the demand that working class organizations, having won national liberation, must now fight for socialism. And for that we need a theory. Insufficient to have rage and anger and emotion. We need to bring that rage, anger and emotion into a theoretical dialogue with the movements that are taking place in the world. The Tricontinental, my friends, is the start of an epoch. That epoch is going to be with us for a long time. We need also find a way to dialogue with each other. Because one of the things that happens is the forms of our dialogue with each other also illustrate something to the working class and peasantry. When the left appears acrimonious and divisive with each other, it confuses our principal class allies. It confuses the working class and peasantry. The Tricontinental shows us that not only are we fighting against imperialism, but we have to, as Ho Chi Minh said, we have to be forces of emulation. And I can't think of better forces to emulate than the three of them today. They've done such a terrific job. Please give them a warm round of applause.